Hello, and on behalf of the Cybereason team, welcome to today's webinar discussing Cybereason's Redefined NGAV. Thank you all for coming. This session is being recorded, and we'll be sending a link to the on-demand recording in a follow-up email. Please feel free to post any questions you may have in the chat, and we'll try to cover those at the end. With that, I'll hand it over to Justin to kick us off.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, very much for joining us today. Let's go ahead and get started with our presentation, NGAV Redefined. My name is Justin Buchanan, and I work in the product marketing organization here at Cybereason. And I have the pleasure of being joined today by our CTO and co-founder, Yonatan Striem-Amit. Yonatan, would you like to say a few words?
Absolutely. Justin, first and foremost, thank you for hosting me today. It's a pleasure to be here with this very esteemed list of guests that we're seeing here on the guest list. So thank you all for joining us. This is one of the most exciting topics I get to talk about, which is how do we maintain leadership over the adversary in the market around the core security, basically defining a very simple question. How do we make sure that we provide for you the absolute best security value, prevention, detection, response of threats across the board? Naturally, this is one of the reasons why I started the company all those years ago, and what keeps me waking up in the morning is how better ways do we have to find the adversary. So I'm excited to be here today and talk to you about it, and I think you're going to love what you're seeing from us.
Thank you, Yonatan. Fantastic to have you with us here today. We have a great agenda ahead of us in today's presentation. First, Yonatan will share his vision for the future of prevention tools. Then I will take you through Cybereason's next generation antivirus offering and our 9 layers of unparalleled attack protection. And then we will close out by taking questions from all of you in our Q&A session. Please feel free to enter your questions into the Q&A panel throughout the presentation. We look forward to addressing them at that time at the end. At this time, I will pass it over to Yonatan for him to take us through his vision.
Hi, everyone. Before I talk about the future of prevention, let's understand why endpoint security is becoming such a critical thing, or even becoming more increasingly important. We're even since the pandemic and before that, but it's still ongoing, we're seeing a rapid adoption of new IT architectures. People still remain either work from home or hybrid. The cloud adoption is pushing the boundary on what we define to be our network, from SaaS solutions to cloud as an infrastructure. Attackers are adopting. We're seeing the recent attacks, for example, the infamous Uber attack was in an environment that leverages two-factor authentication, and attackers are adopting technology such as exploiting MFA fatigue to really bypass. All of these things make the endpoint one of the most critical boundaries of our security architecture, no matter what kind of business we're in, whether it's a manufacturing, hospital, telecommunications, small business, large business. The attackers are definitely still going towards our endpoint. This becomes a critical asset. It's a trust boundary. It always is the trust boundary when we do look at the device. And this is the reason why attackers are constantly still on the lookout for those endpoints. This is true for malware. This is true for advanced attackers going to do full malicious operation. This is true for the script kiddies that just try to automate their attacks. They are going after a lot of assets, but always the endpoint is at the center of those assets, whether it's to get further access to the cloud or to other sources. The endpoint is the element here. What are we seeing on the attacker side? The attackers are evolving quickly. They're adopting technologies faster than defenders are doing it. Everything from learning to live off the land and not bringing their own malware, doing things like fileless malware, adopting for memory-based only attacks. Once they have access to execute code, they are extremely creative in the way they're doing it. And I wish we could say that the rate of exploitation or 0 days has been declining. And actually still, the most legacy approaches done by hackers still win. So we're seeing we have hackers that are well-resourced. And right now, from a geopolitical standpoint, we know there's a lot of infusion of knowledge between, especially in kind of the Eastern Europe, between what nation-state hackers are and criminal hackers are. There's currently right now a even blurrier line as these groups are getting drafted, so to speak, to work for their governments and going back then into the commercial criminal sector. So there's a lot of knowledge infusion. We're seeing that humans just cannot solve the problem. It's the influx of events, the automation that the hackers are adopting means that if defenders continue to rely on more manual or single machine working to work, it's not just going to happen. At the end of the day, our first mission as security defenders is to take care of all those threats with the least amount of effort as possible. And we do that by continuously investing in how we solve, find, detect, and stop automatically the hackers. And the prevention technology is the epitome of that. Take all the stream of data happening on our environments and identify the malicious element out of that and stop it before any damage is done, before any labor needs to be done to remove it, and make it so that it's easy and seamless. That's the challenge that we put ourselves, finding those incredibly hard to detect signals in a way that is overcoming the huge investment in evasion that hackers are putting, and do it in a way that doesn't require any labor from the defenders to take a benefit on. It's completely automatic, it's completely effortless. That's the mission, and we're going to show you today how we're doing it and why it matters. Now, I think it's critical to see on a broader landscape. The first generation NGAVs, major hackers from the Uber attack to SolarWinds is happening on their watch. And in these particular two cases, one of our nice purple competitors have been the guard dog in both of them. They have failed. And the reason is that the first generation NGAVs, those who are not adopting AI at the right speed, those who are not adopting memory-based analysis at the right speed, and those who are not adopting technologies such as our VPP, will not have a chance of stopping the attacker. There's too much effort on the defender side involved in finding new ways to evade versus not enough in some of those solutions don't invest enough in keeping up with the time, which is why a investment in maturing the EPP offering and finding more bad is so critical to move forward. But before we dive into what we're showing you today, I want to look at the broader context. Attackers are evolving in a way that is increasing. And even attacks that are touching the endpoint are not necessarily targeting the endpoint. Let's think of the Uber hack, for example. Started with a phishing and MFA fatigue, so confusing the user into just accepting an MFA, sending an unsuspecting user a text about our application for two-factor authentication is broken. Can you just please press yes so it doesn't bother you anymore? It was just that silly. And then going and exploiting credentials that were leaked online to then get access to a VPN from which they move to the endpoint, from which they move to other cloud-based assets. This is not just the works of an incredibly sophisticated hacker. This is today the playbook for both criminals, nation states, and whether they're advanced or not advanced. And the way to solve it is understanding that attacks are an end-to-end process that are executed by the hackers, and our way as defenders is to merge the data and unify the data across the board. Part of what we're doing when we're launching our XDR offering is really piecing together the endpoint, non-endpoint, identity, application, all of these together to make sure that defenders have an end-to-end view and can stop not just the symptom of the attack, but the whole of the attack. So if I have to sum it up, and I don't want to go on too long of a rant here, we're seeing attackers evolving. We have to evolve against them in every arena they play with, but we also have to never forget the actual arena is the entire business, the entire ecosystem, whether it's our endpoint, our identities, the applications we use. All of these things are areas where we need to protect. So Cybereason has a much broader story than just the endpoint. We're taking our leadership in endpoint on prevention, detection, response across all the platform, Mac, Linux, Windows, of course, mobile devices, connecting those with the cloud applications you use, whether it's Office 365, Google Workspace, Slack, Salesforce, GitHub, bringing all of these together, bringing your network data on your existing on-prem assets, connect them all together, and then we can give you a holistic view to prevent and remediate the threat across your entire stack. From ransomware. Is a ransomware just attacking my endpoints, my servers? Is it trying to exploit your data from my SaaS solutions? Can we solve business email compromise and transition from phishing to, from a phishing scenario into a endpoint attack scenario? Can we stop data exfiltration when it's being executed through identity theft, a modern SaaS application? Can we find malware and find the way the malware communicates? All of these things is what XDR bring you. So if you sum it up, Cybereason has a very strong technology that is constantly being massively invested on in preventing malware and preventing threats on endpoint, and within an ecosystem of security tooling that interact together to give you the promise of XDR, the ability to find, detect, and stop threats across the entire stack. But if I kind of wrap everything, it still is, and it's becoming more and more critical that the most important battleground is the endpoint. We have to keep innovating ahead of the adversary. We have to lead in whenever the adversary develops new IP, we have to be there at the same time, breaking their new intellectual property and breaking the new malware techniques, and just stop it before damage is done, not just for one malware, but for the whole family. Justin, let's show how we deliver on that.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much as well for the vision into the future. Now, as Yonatan said, in the future we need to, and we already are, moving so that we can protect far more than just the endpoint. But success is built upon success in the endpoint today. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about how Cybereason is redefining NGAV to win today's battles with the release of new and unique capabilities that block the most advanced attacker techniques designed to circumvent traditional AV and those first-gen NGAV tools that Yonatan mentioned. With this release, Cybereason is now the only vendor that brings a unique approach of multi-layered NGAV defense, where each layer is purpose-built to prevent unique attacker techniques. With these 9 independent yet complementary layers, we are able to provide unparalleled attack protection. Cybereason's prevention stack enables customers to defend forward to end attacks. Attacks that are stopped by prevention are stopped in the earliest stages of the kill chain and before they can become malignant. Our prevention stack keeps our customers undefeated in the fight against ransomware. No Cybereason customer has ever suffered material business disruption from a ransomware attack, and we continue innovating every day to ensure that we can stay ahead of attackers and maintain that level of service. And finally, our prevention stack provides absolute prevention with operational simplicity. Historically, highly advanced tools have required legions of staff and bottomless IT budgets, while streamlined tools have been simplistic and ineffective. Cybereason NGAV provides nation-state level prevention while still being simple to deploy and manage on a day-to-day basis. When we look at these 9 layers of protection that I've been alluding to, what you will see is that they cover a wide spectrum. They span all the way from fairly standard USB network and disk encryption endpoint controls, all the way down to Cybereason's proprietary and industry-leading predictive ransomware protection. These layers provide comprehensive coverage for the gamut of threats faced by our customers. For today's update, let's focus on the 2 new layers that we have released in this prevention stack, and those are our new behavioral execution prevention layer and our industry-first variant payload prevention layer. Let's look at each of these 2 layers individually, starting with behavioral execution prevention. Behavioral execution prevention learns from the rare attacker activity that gets through our prevention stack to our EDR product and our MDR service, and codifies those learnings into prevention heuristics. Most commonly, the type of attacker activity that slips through is the most sophisticated techniques, living off the land techniques. This is when attackers leverage legitimate system processes to propagate their malicious activity. The abuse of these legitimate processes makes this malicious activity very difficult to block in a prevention stack without blocking legitimate services as well. These living off the land techniques are much like a wolf in sheep's clothing hiding among the flock, leveraging the camouflage of something that seems benign while harboring nefarious activity. Cybereason takes the lessons we have learned from examining sheep after sheep to know when something that seems slightly off is actually a very big issue. With Cybereason Behavioral Execution Prevention, we take the learnings of the rare things that slip through our prevention stack, and we reproduce those elusive attacker behaviors, recording them as learned indicators. Now, with this information, we can rip off the attacker's camouflage and stop this activity in its earliest stages, in the prevention stack, without waiting for it to be detected by our EDR or MDR solutions. And now let's look at the other new layer, variant payload prevention. Variant payload prevention, this is something that is only available with Cybereason, truly unique. When attackers infiltrate systems, they need collections of tools to advance their malicious activity. They keep these tools neatly packaged up in toolboxes called payloads. Some of the most common payloads we see time and time again are Cobalt Strike Beacons and Metasploit Interpreter, just to give a couple examples. In an effort to avoid being caught when attackers recycle their known payloads, a sophisticated attacker will put a simple veil over their payloads before a strategic attack. They'll take the time to obfuscate their payloads by creating variations of them. This simple obfuscation easily fooled current prevention systems. Now, imagine for a second if we as humans could be as easily fooled by a minor change in appearance to something. This would be akin to seeing a Toyota Camry roll off the factory line. We all look at it and say, certainly, that's a Toyota Camry. Now, what if I take that same Toyota Camry and I put a very awesome spoiler on the back? Would you still be able to tell me that it's a Toyota Camry? Well, of course you would. You wouldn't be fooled. Now, instead of a reliable and family-friendly car, let's talk about a Cobalt Strike Beacon payload. If that payload is taken and altered ever so slightly, other prevention systems won't be able to tell that is still the same thing they should block, now just with an awesome new spoiler, and they let that bad thing through. Cybereason can tell that it is the same thing, and in fact, only Cybereason can tell that it is the same thing. Variant payload prevention monitors the code being loaded into memory and uses binary similarity analysis technology and near match analysis to identify obfuscated code that exhibits characteristics of a known malicious payload. When these payload variants are identified, Cybereason prevents their execution, stopping attackers in their tracks. Now let's go ahead and see variant payload prevention in action.
Justin, if I
Yes,
may,
sir.
one of the risks of bringing a CTO on a conversation is that I like to geek out on technology. Variant payload analysis is taking inspiration from the way we fight viruses, biological viruses. It basically looks at the genetic markup of a malware, how the basic building blocks, the basic snippets of code that end up making that malware. And even though the malware may try to evolve and things will change, the basic building blocks of the code, encryption concepts, technologies they've invented, pieces of code that they've implemented in the past, even if they simply just copy and pasted a couple of code lines from an old version of the malware that the hackers built and just use it in the new malware, that means that the new malware carries genetic fingerprinting of an old one. By using VPP, we take the same idea we used to develop vaccine, literally biological vaccines, and apply it for malware. So if the second that the malicious hackers simply copied a couple of lines of code from one malware to the other, we're already onto them. No matter how much they try to obfuscate and change and hide, eventually VPP and the technology behind it, binary similarity analysis, understands the malware genetics, is able to find it and block it before it executes it. We were going to show you today a lot of examples. All the examples we'll show you are the most evasive, the most difficult to find malware right now in the market. All of them succumb to technologies such as VSA, VPP, and its sibling layers of prevention in our ATP stack. So it's absolutely a huge innovation and a huge breakthrough in malware prevention that we're showing you right now today.
That's excellent. Thank you, Yonatan. It is very exciting, something that we are so proud of and something that we're grateful to be able to bring as the first vendor to offer this in the industry. As Yonatan mentioned, we have 4 demonstrations that we're going to take you through now, and these are the most evasive payloads available in the world today. The first thing that I will be showing you is a Cobalt Strike Beacon, which is the most advanced penetration tool used by pen testers, nation-state hackers, and of course, criminals. Then we'll show you Metasploit Meterpreter, which is the poster child of how people leverage off-the-shelf tools to attack organizations. That will be followed by Emotet, which is the most expensive attack right now in circulation. And we'll close out our demonstrations with Lockbit 3, which is one of the most evasive, pervasive, and effective ransomware payloads when it comes to extracting both currency and data from victims. When evaluating prevention solutions, it's important to consider, would your tool be able to stop this payload? Now, how about if a novel version of this payload was created through obfuscation? Would the tool you're considering be able to stop this? Let's take a look at Cybereason doing just that. For the purposes of the demonstrations, please direct your attention to the webcams and media viewer window. So if you can see Yonatan and I's faces, you're looking in the right place. That is where the demonstrations will play. So the first demonstration that we have is loading now. And we have a Cobalt Strike Beacon that has been obfuscated using the Veil framework. When we attempt to run the executable by clicking on it, we see that Cybereason correctly identifies the payload as a Cobalt Strike Beacon, blocks it from loading, and quarantines the malicious executable. The second sample is a Metasploit Meterpreter. This was also obfuscated using Veil, and as you can see, Cybereason correctly identifies, blocks, and quarantines this payload as well. Let's go ahead and try this again. This time, we'll try to have a legitimate system process load a DLL that is actually a variation of a malicious Emotet payload. Emotet has been labeled by the United States government as one of the most costly and dangerous malware in the world. And when it's pitted against Cybereason, we can see that it too is successfully blocked. And now finally, we will show you an obfuscated version of the Lockbit ransomware. This ransomware is used by attackers around the world to advance the latest ransomware strategy, double extortion. As soon as the attacker launches this attack in the command line, Cybereason identifies it as Lockbit 3 on execution and blocks it immediately. And now, if you'll direct your attention back to the slide viewer, this demonstration of variant payload prevention shows how just one of the 9 layers in Cybereason's NGAV stack can provide unparalleled attack protection. Cybereason is laser focused on enabling security teams to defend forward and stop attacks in their earliest stages. We're focused on ensuring our customers stay undefeated in the fight against ransomware, and we're focused on delivering absolute prevention with operational simplicity. This approach is proven to work in the real world as well as in the lab. These 9 layers of prevention provide truly unparalleled attack protection. And that was proven in 2022 when MITRE Enterprise ran their enterprise attack evaluations, and Cybereason achieved the best results in the history of those evaluations. This evaluation took technology from 30 participating vendors and pitted it against real-world simulations of 2 notorious ransomware and data destruction gangs, Wizard Spider and Sandworm. As we can see, as a result of this multi-layered approach, Cybereason scored a 100% in the prevention-based test. Going beyond just prevention, the larger Cybereason XDR platform proved its prowess by detecting 100% of all 19 simulated attack steps that mimicked Wizard Spider and Sandworm activity. Cybereason experienced 0 delayed detections, and Cybereason was the only vendor to deliver 100% visibility across all operating systems. Cybereason delivered the most high-quality analytic detections across all competing solutions as well. This testing shows that Cybereason is the most effective solution on the market against these highly sophisticated ransomware gangs, Wizard Spider and Sandworm. Cybereason is good at stopping all kinds of malware and all kinds of sophisticated multi-stage attacks. But one thing that I'm really trying to hit home here is all ransomware is malware, and we are really, really good at stopping ransomware. Cybereason is undefeated against ransomware. Now, you've heard me say it enough times in this presentation, it probably warrants further explanation. What that means is that Cybereason has never had a customer's business operations be disrupted as a result of a ransomware attack. We've had individual machines go down, but in every case, we have so swiftly and effectively contained the threat that it has never spread beyond that and has never resulted in disruption. There are two clear reasons why we have been so effective in this fight against ransomware. The first is, as we have discussed here today, our unique 9 layers of prevention that stop attacks in their earliest stages. And the second reason is because our larger XDR stack wins the race against time that is introduced when dealing with advanced persistent threats. Advanced persistent threats lurk in environments for days, weeks, and sometimes even months before they can complete their ultimate objective, which may be encryption and holding the target for ransom or other activities. Cybereason detects this extremely subtle staging activity that occurs in the time before the attackers become overt. And the few things that we don't prevent, we detect. And when we detect such early activity that we root out attackers before they can make a foothold or advance their objectives. That is why our product is proven to be the best in the industry, and that is why we are undefeated against ransomware. And with that, I would now like to move us into our Q&A. If you have any questions for myself or for Yonatan, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A box, and we will address them now. Let me just pull up that screen. All right. Yonatan, the first question I think is a good one for you. It's a straightforward one. How do you define XDR?
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, XDR, let's talk about first about the outcome. The outcome for XDR is our ability to stop threats regardless of the asset and control mechanism used or triggering or taking participation within that attack. That's a kind of a lofty goal. Now, it boils down into 3 critical capabilities. One is the ability to work across your entire asset space. It's no longer a vertical specific conversation. So it touches your endpoints, but it also touches your identity, the applications that you may use in your organization. That's about connecting the dots together just bringing all the data into one place so you can actually find the attack, no matter which assets is being touched on. Why is that critical? Because attackers aren't going after an individual asset. Attackers will easily adopt a hybrid approach in which they might attack an endpoint to steal the credentials, and with those credentials log into a cloud assets, using the cloud assets ability to propagate to other identities or other individuals in the organization, from which they will move to other endpoints or to the cloud or to other SaaS solutions. So if attackers are not working within clearly defined boundaries, defenders cannot afford to work within clearly defined boundaries. So that's element number 1 of XDR. Element number 2 is about connecting the dots. When we tried that approach in the SIM, we ended up drowning with data that very expensive humans needed to try to piece together and keep current and make things work, make a picture. It's a classical situation where there's too many trees, you can't see the forest. The second element of XDR is correlation, the ability to take a very complex enterprise network or business network, look at all the events, alerts, non-alert events across the business, and say, hey, there's a story here that together is the attack. There was an email here that was phishing, and that delivered a malware to that endpoint, and that malware was able to steal credentials and go in, and then those credentials were used in the cloud assets. In order just to give you that full story, there needs to be a huge amount of AI behind the scene that can take all of these and build a clear end-to-end storyline about what happened. This is the essence of the malware. The malicious operation is born for that problem. So correlation is the second piece of the XDR puzzle. And the third piece is the ability to orchestrate responses across the stack. If we look at this attack but are unable to respond, we haven't solved the problem. We haven't really given the defenders the ability to stop these attacks. So the third piece of XDR is about orchestrated response, the ability to go and take action across all the relevant control mechanisms that you may have in place to stop the attack from going forward. So these are the three pillars of XDR: data, correlation, and response.
Thank you, Yonatan. We have a few questions in here about pricing. The first one is, what is the pricing structure on the NGAV platform? So all 9 of the layers that I presented to you today are bundled together as one offering into a low per endpoint pricing structure. Most of our customers do purchase NGAV along with our EDR product and or our managed detection and response offering. In all cases, our sales team can provide you a straightforward quote of a price per endpoint for whichever bundle of solutions you would be most interested in. In order to get that pricing, just head to cybereason.com, and in the upper right corner, you will see a link for contact. And if you submit that form, someone will reach out to you very quickly and answer any of your pricing questions. That's true as well for the other questions we had in here about XDR pricing also. That is available as a per endpoint price as well. You can add it on to NGAV, EDR, MDR, whatever choice of solutions you would like. And once again, just go ahead and use the contact form to get in touch so that we can provide that information to you. The next question that we have, I think, Yonatan, this would be a good one for you, which is, how does Cybereason avoid blocking normal processes accidentally when we're going through, especially when we're talking about blocking things like living off the land techniques?
Absolutely. The critical element is looking at the sequence of operations and all the telltale signs together and understand whether something is malicious or benign. Now, it really depends on the engine. VPP, for example, is looking at genetic material for malware and understand if this is a copy-paste of code or the binary reflection of code from other malware. This is a very powerful technology that, again, if there's a code in your computer that has been copied from a malware and is not being used legitimately in the world, it's very likely a piece of malware. Other solutions, like our behavioral execution prevention, are looking at the sequence of commands being run on your computers and constantly asking itself, is there a mechanism in place here that uses living off the land scenarios to drive malicious activity? Then the beauty of using the 9 layers together, instead of a one-trick pony, as often used by other NGAV solutions, is that each of those engines can be optimized to really excel in a set of problems and not focus on trying to do a one trick to stop all problems. This means that every engine can be fine-tuned to really find the right parts of the threats without ever falling into the trap of being too generic and therefore finding legitimate application. Empirically, we're seeing a industry-breaking standard of how low our positive is on these 9 engines.
Thank you, Yonatan. I believe we have 2 questions in here now. We'll address both of them, but we can probably take one more. So if anyone in the audience is holding on to a question, now is the time to go ahead and put it in the box, and we'll happily address it. So this next question is, can you please elaborate more on some of the 9 layers that were not covered specifically behavioral document protection. Yep, most definitely. Happy to. So all of the 9 layers are profiled in depth in the NGAV datasheet, which should be available for download right now in your webinar portal. There should be a window labeled resources, I believe. So if you locate that on your screen right now, you can download the PDF, and on the second page, it describes all of the layers. Since we didn't have time here today to discuss all of them in depth. To the question with regards to behavioral document protection, this is a great one. The behavioral document protection layer analyzes the behavior of documents, so Word documents, Excel sheets, etc., and the embedded code in those documents, such as macros, to ensure that no malicious activity from those documents is executed. This is very commonly employed to take the potency out of phishing attacks. So many phishing campaigns will leverage malicious macros embedded in documents. And one of the great things about that particular layer is it's an extremely effective way to close that attack vector and, again, help us achieve that objective of stopping things in the earliest phases of the attack. The next question, which will probably be our last, is how does Cybereason work against Lockbit ransomware? This ransomware encrypts data incredibly fast. That's a great point. So we did show today in the demonstration us working against Lockbit. One of the reasons why many other solutions out there have such a challenging time stopping Lockbit ransomware is because they so frequently and effectively obfuscate their payload. So something like variant payload prevention proves to be really, really effective at finding this before it can cause any impact or any damage, even when it has been obfuscated. So that is one way, as we showed in the demonstration. The other thing that we didn't have a chance to talk much about today but the 9th of the 9 layers is predictive ransomware protection in Cybereason. And should something get that far, get through all of those layers and get to that, what predictive ransomware protection does is it can actually identify the beginning stages of encryption occurring on a device and stop that encryption activity. Now, in the event that any files were encrypted on that device before we were able, and we're talking milliseconds here, but before it was able to identify that encryption activity is occurring, it can also restore those files back from backup. Yonatan, is there anything that you'd like to add with regards to Lockbit or ransomware protection in general that I might have missed?
Absolutely. When you look at modern ransomware campaigns, they often look almost indistinguishable from APT until at the last minute, where they turn on encryption. They would break into an environment, they would try to move laterally, get control of as many assets as they can, exfiltrate data so they can use a double extortion, basically not only encrypt the file, but also hold them for ransom for publication. All of these things, each of those steps is not only a chance to completely define the attack, it's also a chance to stop it in its entirety. So Lockbit itself is a culmination of a long campaign that needs to end up with breaking the ransomware. So while our solution, of course, stops Lockbit from encryption, in any Lockbit campaign we're seeing, we stop it way ahead of the actual malware getting even a chance to execute. So ransomware these days is a much bigger team sport than it used to be. It's a much more complex operation, and Cybereason's prevention technology is able to stop not just the payload, not just the ransomware, but all of the steps that are happening before that, before the ransomware is even delivered into a target environment.
Thank you, Yonatan. All right, that is all the time that we have today. I just want to thank you all very much for joining us, and I'd like to pass it over to Sarah to close us out.
All right, thanks, Justin. That's a wrap on today's session. We'll be sending a link to the on-demand recording in a follow-up email tomorrow. Thanks again from the Cybereason team for attending today's session, and enjoy the rest of your week.